of Trustees to order. First on the agenda is public comment. If there's anyone here from the public who would like to make a comment, please let me know. There will also be opportunity at the end of the meeting to do that. So first up, next up is the presentation from the papers.
Good afternoon.
Oh, we're gonna do stand up. One thing I wanted to say before that, I'd like to say. You will notice on the agenda I've added times back in. We haven't had times in there. One, the group evaluation that I got last time, some people said we're concerned about the time the meeting takes. And so I wanted to do that to sort of set an expectation about how long this meeting is going to be, and it's going to be long. There's a lot on the agenda tonight. And part of the reason of putting the times on there is so that all the trustees can play a role in noticing when the time is up and can speak up and say, hey, we're running over, or we have more time, and then we can make a group decision about whether we're going to spend more time on that issue or not. How does that sound? Does that sound good? So that's what's up with the times and why they're on the agenda. Okay, with that.
Okay. My name's Carol Hausman. This is Chris Healy. We work with Marvin and Company. We perform the audit of the 12/31/18 financial statements for the library. We're going to take about 15 minutes to give you a very brief overview of the process and the reporting. I'm going to start out by just going through the required communication to those charged with governance. And that's that letter, the separate letter that we handed out with the bound financial statement report. And basically, this walks you through what after we complete our audit, we need to communicate certain things to you to make you aware of the audit process and how it went. And to begin with, just be aware that management's responsible for selecting the accounting principles and policies that are used in preparing the financial statements. And as part of our audit process, we look at those policies and principles and make sure that they make sense for your organization. And in the current year, there was a significant change in one of the accounting standards. That was the introduction of generally accepted government standards number 75, accounting and financial reporting for post-employment benefits other than pensions. Now, last year we spoke to you that was going to occur. You were required to change your policy and your principles to follow that. What it did was take your, you have benefits for retired employees other than pensions, as in health insurance. And in the past, you were required to record a liability, but that was not, you weren't required to record the whole liability. GASB 75 said, hey, wait a minute, we're going to change the requirement of how that liability was calculated, and we're also going to make you record the whole thing on your statements. And that was really the biggest change in your statements in the current year. And what that did was it decreased your net position by $2.9 million. So we recorded a prior period adjustment to your net position, and you'll see that big decrease. And it's a paper entry, etc. And we discussed it, but it's here, and you did implement that. Otherwise, the accounting policies and principles followed were consistent with the prior year. Know that your financial statements include some significant estimates, and as part of our audit, we look at those estimates for reasonableness, and the significant estimates in your statements revolve around that GASB 75 calculation as well as your GASB 68 New York State retirement pension. We looked at those estimates for reasonableness, The financial statement disclosures themselves are net neutral, consistent, and clear. We had no difficulties encountered in performing the audit. And when you think about that, you had some changeover in the current year. Adam took over. We worked with him very closely, and Chuck was still there. And actually, the transition process went very well. Realize that as part of our audit procedures, we look at the internal controls over significant transaction classes and account balances. And whenever we have turnover in a high-level position, we make sure that we look at those controls, and we have nothing to report finding-wise relating to that. So that's really a good thing for the library to note. Corrected and uncorrected misstatements. We were required to make a few small entries as a result of the audit procedures, and we've attached those to this letter. We had no disagreements with management relating to accounting principles, our audit findings, the process itself. Management, we're not aware that they consulted with other auditors relating to any issues or how to present things, and we call that opinion shopping, but we're not aware of that. And we really have no other audit findings or issues to report today. So that is a big overview of the audit process. Chris is going to run through the opinion and some of the other required reporting that were, yes.
I hate to interrupt. I'm not feeling well, and I just want to get back home, but there's something I'd like to ask you. May I do it now, please?
I'm sorry, are you making a public comment?
No, I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
You have something at the other library called...
Excuse me, I'm sorry. We have time for public comment.
No, I realize that. I can't stay. I'm not feeling well. Could you give me two minutes? That's all I'm asking. 2 minutes, maybe less. In fact, this is taking up more time than the question.
Right, because we have a meeting that we're running.
Okay, then let me just get it over with. You have something called Albany Med at one of the branches?
So, these are our auditors, this is not the library management, so
Oh, it's not.
do you have a concern about the library?
Yes.
So, thank you. Scott is the director of the library.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to start on page 1 of the financial statement packet. This is our opinion. It goes through a lot of the things that Carol already talked about. It talks about the fact that we audited your financial statements. Management is responsible. We're responsible to audit those financial statements. On the top of page 2, you'll see our opinion is that the financial statements fairly present.
Page 2
of the big packet. Our opinion is that the financial statements are fairly presented, so that's a clean opinion. That's what you're striving to get. The next paragraph there, the change in accounting principle, because that new standard this year, GASB 75, is so significant, we're required to just put in a paragraph that alerts the user of the financial statements that there was a significant change this year. The next paragraph talks about required supplementary information. So there's some additional required schedules included in the financial statements that are not part of the basic financial statements. We subject those to certain limited procedures, but we don't provide an opinion on those. And then the last paragraph just talks about there's another report that's required since you're a governmental entity, and lets the reader know that that's included also, and we'll touch on that in a few minutes. So the next section is management's discussion and analysis. This is a great spot to go if you just want a high-level summary of the year. It's a little bit more user-friendly than going through the entire audit report itself. But I'm going to skip forward to page 8. So page 8 is your statement of net position on the full accrual basis. So as you are probably aware, you have the fund financial statements and the full accrual financial statements. So this statement takes into account all your long-term assets and liabilities. The biggest change here, as Carol mentioned, you'll see some items related to the other post-employment benefits. The deferred outflows is a new item this year. That really relates to the timing of when the actuary does their calculation. And then you'll see that the other post-employment benefits liability is up about 2.5 million from last year, and that's a direct result of the new standard. On the next page, this is your statement of activities. Really consistent overall year to year on the revenue and expenditure side. The one major change on the revenue side was the addition of pilot payments that you received during 2018 of about 440,000. So that's really the only big change that jumps out there. At the bottom, you'll see the change in net position, and then you'll see the cumulative effect of the change in accounting principle. That 2.9 million, that's the actual impact on prior years of implementing that new standard. So this is what Carol was talking about when we had to do that prior period adjustment to reflect that liability. The next page is your fund balance sheet. So this has your general fund, your debt service fund, your capital project funds. There was no activity this year, so they're not presented. But your only major change here is really just that your cash position is significantly better than it was last year. That's largely due to favorable budget variances and those pilot payments that we talked about. The next page is your fund revenue and expenditures. Again, very consistent with the exception of the pilots that were added in the current year. So if you skip ahead, page 14 starts the footnotes. There's a lot of really good information in here. If you wanted some more detail on any of the numbers that you're seeing in the financial statements, this is a great spot to go. There's probably some good explanation in the footnotes. I'm not going to take your time and go through these all, but I do want to point out a couple of key things to you. On page 26, this is your long-term liabilities. This is where your debt maturity schedule is presented. So if you're looking out, trying to plan towards the future, this will give you the information that says, okay, this is how much we have coming up in debt payments. So that's important information to have. On the next page, Carol mentioned the New York State retiree pension system. This footnote is very lengthy, gives a lot of detail about what that retirement system is, the assumptions that are used in calculating that liability. It's usually a pretty big number, so if you wanted more detail on where that comes from, that's your spot.
And just remember with that liability, the market, you're about 2 years behind on that. So anything that happens with the market impacts the assets that are in the retirement system and can impact what you're required to contribute to that, the expense. It's been pretty consistent, but that can change dramatically if the market changes.
What do you mean we're 2 years behind on that?
You're not 2 years behind, that was the wrong thing to say. The system that values your liability and tells you how much to pay in is always about 2 years behind. So
That
if
means we would know in 2 years in advance if things are gonna start to change? No.
Yeah,
2
well,
years
if you
after.
see the market go
2
down
years after.
significantly, you can sort of plan that 2 years from now, you'll have to contribute a lot more.
Okay.
Is and that's just a sort of a guide. But right now, it's pretty consistent.
Okay, I'm going to skip ahead to page 32. So this is your other post-employment benefit obligation footnote. So this is the new standard this year. If you go back to last year, you would see there was a footnote there, but it was a lot different under the old standard, which was GASB number 45. So this is going to give you all the information about how that number is calculated, all the assumptions, the plan information. It's all going to be in this footnote. It also talks about the prior period adjustment that we've already discussed. So this has some more good information that you might find useful.
And I like to point out with that, because it's health insurance, you're, you know, any changes in the health trends and the premium trends and any of the cost of healthcare, as well as the changes in discount rates relating to just present values, et cetera, can significantly impact your liability. Either way, can increase it or decrease it. But also, what you usually have to pay out on a yearly basis for that is consistent, because you're paying as you go. So your cash flow is not as dramatically hit with that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Also that in New York State, there's actually, for most governmental entities, there's no mechanism to fund that liability, so you can't set money aside to say, oh, we owe, you know, whatever it is, $1 million, I wanna put $2 million aside. As of right now, there's no mechanism to do that for your organization. So it's a pay-as-you-go, nothing really has changed with that, it's just the new standard requires that you report that full liability so that you're more comparable to a not-for-profit or a for-profit organization. And the last footnote that I want to talk about is on page 36, the payments in lieu of taxes. So this is a new footnote this year. It just lets you know that you had those pilot payments and that you know, it actually does reduce a portion of what you would have received if they paid the full amount of the taxable value. The next page has your budget to actual schedule. I'm not going to go through that in any great detail, but that's pretty detailed. So if you wanted some information about where your budget variances were and what was favorable and what was unfavorable, that's a great tool to use there. All in all, you were $657,000 favorable in total between a favorable variance on the revenue side and as well as the expenditure side. So your increase in net position for the year, fund equity for the year, was $657,000. Okay. And then I'm going to skip ahead one more time to page 41. This is our required report on compliance, since it's a governmental audit. So this is the other report that I mentioned when we were back at the very beginning on the opinion. This report just lets the reader know that, again, we audited your financial statements. As part of that, we consider your internal controls, but we don't give an opinion on your internal controls. We would report any issues that came to our attention if there are any, and we're happy to report there are none. So that's laid out in this report. And then the last page of the packet just is a little summary sheet of the audit. Lets you know that it was an unmodified opinion, no findings. So it's just a great little spot that you can see everything kind of in one spot.
So it went very well, and I guess I just also want to point out that people were ready for us. You know, the give and take, we were able to turn it around timely, and we appreciate that. It helps, makes our life easy as well.
I just want to make a note that both Adam and Marjorie should be noted. They do the lion's share of the collection of the data for this, and I think they did extremely well.
I would concur.
Any questions?
That was a lot of
I
information.
know.
I look at these pages and pages and pages of different things that look almost the same, but a little bit different. So I thank you for trying to help us understand it. We didn't have an accounting background. So given that, which shows us in the same note, do you have any other questions, things that are really confusing and you want to have it explained a little more clearly? Please ask. I budgeted to about 6:30, so we have 10 minutes. If you want to ask some questions, we have.
So excited. I'll say it, guys. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I also, it's really great to hear that, given big changes we had in staffing that you found things went really smoothly. That's impressive, so thanks to Adam and Marjorie.
Thank you.
Karen,
Yes.
just one last, I just wanna thank you, for your help with your audit, and just to recognize that, just because we don't have questions doesn't mean that we're not greatly appreciative. We're elected, and our number one job here is fiduciary, and we are really blessed with an excellent, team here of staff and administrators. And, so as a trustee, I have great confidence in our ability to manage our, the taxpayers' money well. And that's our first job, and so, we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, next up on the agenda is minutes, so, I think I motion
Where are you
to,
gonna adopt that?
excuse me?
Or are you gonna accept the audit report?
Oh, yeah, we can do that.
Probably a good idea.
Okay. Before we do that, we need to make a motion to accept the audit report.
I'll make a motion
Allison,
to
thank
accept
you.
the audit report.
Second.
Sarah, thank you, second. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Okay. Next up is the minutes, so I'll take a motion to accept the minutes.
They're on page 52.
52 today, thank you, Jenna, making that motion, and a second. Andy, thank you. Any comments, questions? Okay, all in favor? All right, I'm gonna catch up on page 52. Oh. Big, okay. Oh, you're secret. Treasurer's report and check register.
Which is on page 55.
Chuck, is there anything that you would like to point out in this month's report?
No, it was pretty well even this month. There wasn't anything that really jumped out at me. There was a couple rather large expenditures, but I think they were all normal. And there was a couple of repair contracts that went this month, which kind of throws it off because it's for the whole year. But we never ever do amortize it over the year. We've never done it that way, so it just expenses as they're paid. Other than that, I didn't notice anything really different.
Any trustees have questions about the treasurer's report? So we can move to check register. Make a motion to approve the check register.
I'll make a motion.
Thanks, Allison.
Second.
And second, any discussion on that, questions?
Can I just ask about Mango, how well is it used?
We don't have the stats right now, but I can definitely look into that and see what the usage is. That is not our decision, that's bought with Central Book Aid. So that state, the Central Library Committee of the Directors Association makes the decisions on that, but I'll definitely get a usage.
Do the directors all sit on the central library?
No, I think it's 4 of us, it's Lenny,
Oh,
Jeff, myself. Deanna, do you remember?
It's a representative from large and small libraries from both counties, so there's like 6 of you.
I'm just curious, that
It's great. We carried it separately as a library for multiple years. And if I'm wrong on this, 2 years, I make that. And we had some under usage because of that. But we also got a lot of feedback when we got rid of it.
Sure.
So that's why the system picked it up. And I can ask over at Upper Hudson and see what the usage is there.
Yeah, there was just some recent research that said that those online language programs are not very effective at actually learning languages, so I'm kind of curious, and my experience on them, it was fun, but I can't say I remember any of the language I was, well, but we can't use me as an example, but.
Can you share that article if you can find it?
Yeah, I'll have to.
Cause I'd like to bring that to the directors when the discussion, we'll have a discussion about it.
Yeah.
Sorry to put Deanna on the spot. When do we typically choose those things? Is that an August decision?
Yeah, the Central Library Advisory Committee usually meets around August to make a decision for the following year.
Can we introduce Deanna?
Deanna has been the head of West Branches for 3 months now. Almost four months now. So when Mary Kuhn switched to Central Branches, she was with us for several years as our e-librarian. If her name is familiar, she went to do system work for a few years, and we've been lucky enough to have her come.
Scott's employment plan is working, right?
That one did, that one worked out really well.
Yeah, right, we let him go and then we wrote you back in.
She got a lot of great experience.
Happy to be back, thank you guys.
So we do have a motion on the table. Is there any more discussion around the check register?
I just had a question. What is the Fish's Majestic Enterprises Incorporated?
My assumption on that one is going to be programming, but I'll let Adam speak.
No, actually, that is, believe it or not, that is a glass company.
Yes.
That we used, I believe that was for this branch, actually. Yeah, silly name, but it is a legitimate.
What number was that?
9806?
You asking me another one?
No, they asked what number it was.
Alright, so if there are no other questions, I'll ask all in favor of approving check register. Great, thank you. I did, yeah, we did.
Alice and Andy.
Next up is committee and liaison reports. First up is the personnel committee. Right.
So the personnel committee met to, sorry, I'm trying to get to my notes here, to review some job specs, for a facilities director, human resources director, and finance manager, and an L3 position. We as a committee would like to move to, sorry, I always get stage fright, to approve a raise that Scott is asking for the facility manager. The reason that we're bringing it to the full committee is that it is over the percentage that we had given Scott as a discretionary percentage. And the reason that we were talking about the specs is because the facility manager job has changed significantly since it was originally presented to the board, and that was the reason Scott was bringing it to us, to sort of look at. And then, do I do that now, or do I keep going through the?
Is there an amount?
I was looking for 5%.
5%.
We didn't.
Yeah, we
did not
so
do
we're gonna,
any of
so we're
that.
not
We
there.
didn't
We're
have
not
that
there yet, I'm sorry,
conversation.
I'm
We're
jumping
gonna have
ahead.
another-
Yeah,
we're gonna have
I wasn't
another-
at that meeting.
Nor was I.
Sorry, I thought we were done with that one, but it's not here, so that's okay.
So we just talked about the job descriptions.
The job descriptions, yes.
Right, we haven't seen a proposal for the,
That's coming.
for the
I apologize.
admin changes,
I
right?
got excited.
Yeah.
But so, we reviewed all of the job descriptions, we're making some changes to them, and then we're gonna talk more about those increases. We also went through the quarterly staffing review, we currently have 4 positions open, there's an L1 being hired for West Branches, and, then we now have a senior clerk at every single branch, which is a big deal, we're excited about that. And, yeah, more to come about those positions.
Well,
Anything else?
as I recall, we moved to bring the facilities manager job description to the full board, so I actually don't see it here.
Oh, I thought we
Right,
changed
so-
our minds about that.
Right, the board doesn't approve job descriptions. In this case, the personnel committee was reviewing the job description scope to justify the higher increase that was outside of discretion. So the board doesn't vote on the specifics of job descriptions.
Okay, so we were just helping Scott with the job descriptions and then they're going to civil service, is that correct? Okay,
So we take into consideration the feedback that we get,
right.
and then we bring them to civil service.
And then the board's role is to approve the higher salary rate as we adopted a policy last.
So this is lost in translation somewhere.
I see.
The board will ultimately have to approve any changes to the job spec.
Oh,
Civil service
okay.
won't do it until
Okay.
until you have, but
Okay.
we can't do it until that has been done.
Then what's that?
The proposed changes, so the proposed changes need to go to them, because there's no point in you approving them if they haven't, or won't.
I see.
Okay, so it's a multi-step process. The other problem is some of the changes that I've seen thus far, some of the changes that I've seen thus far are gonna create other issues, and I think that we just need to deal with them internally with the committee before they ultimately get here.
Okay.
Once everybody is comfortable, I think that the best approach would be take the committee's suggestions through staff to civil service, get their approval, get the civil service departments, okay. They'll tell us whether they want the board to approve it before the commission does or vice versa. It'll probably be that they say, get the board to sign off, we would be comfortable putting these up to our commission, get the board to sign off, and then they'll go to the commission.
Back and forth.
Okay.
Because these are all competitive class positions that have been approved locally
By civil service.
by the Albany City Commission.
And then you also said that the public employee review board made?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that the committee needs to talk about is we don't wanna change things that are gonna make us go back to PERB. That was a litigated issue.
Okay,
That's just not, that won't be helpful to
so
anybody.
you're
Yeah, we just need to
working with
talk
staff
through all of that to figure out which of these things are really needed and which might trigger a PERB review. Because the positions are designated by PERB as MC based on the job spec that PERB had and the testimony that occurred at that hearing.
Okay,
So if anything materially changed, arguably you'd need to go back there.
okay,
So it's, maybe you decide you want to, but I'll tell you, you don't want to if you can avoid it.
Okay,
So we will schedule to have Bob at our next personnel meeting.
that makes sense.
If the committee's
If they're gonna start looking at, specs in that way, yeah.
I think we can, from the administration's point of view, we can improve this process, but this is a new process for us. So I think it's just getting everything lined up the correct way, so it'll be smoother in the future.
great. Yes?
And the reason that you wouldn't wanna go back to PERB, is you would tell us.
You spent a lot of money and it took a lot of time.
Thank you.
And we get back to the original reason we want to do this is to give larger increases to staff that have larger responsibilities, then that would just extend potentially that time, or I guess we could make a decision.
Without knowing what the specifics are, it may be that we don't need to worry about the PERB aspect of things.
Okay.
It's just we're dealing with positions that have all been designated, so we just need to look at that before you just trudge into it, because you could inadvertently create an issue.
Right.
Frankly, a lot of the editing was just for continuity and it was not
Yeah,
substantial scope changes, so if
And so you wonder
don't wanna do that if you.
that's right. You get to the question of, is this juice worth the squeeze?
Right, so I'm hoping that actually you can work with staff before it comes to the committee, maybe to the committee
Yeah,
as well.
so Scott and I had talked about it, I think that we just, somewhere the message got diluted a little bit, that we probably need to refer it back to the committee, we'll talk at that level, then they'll send stuff up.
Okay.
So we don't bring the specs to the big board,
Just trying to make sure I have all of my.
You,
Yes.
you,
Yes.
you may need to bring the specs to the big
Yeah.
board if you're making
If we
changes.
make
If we're
any
making
changes.
changes, okay.
Okay, thank you for clearing that up. Any other questions about that? All right. Policy and governance.
Actually, I do have one more question.
Okay.
In the minutes, they talked about 4 positions open, and I'm assuming that one of them is that L1 position in the West Branches. But what are the others? And I'm, I don't mean to be
Three clerk, so this is a snapshot.
Snapshot.
So this was about 3 months ago, so that's changed. But Marjorie, there was about 3 clerk positions. Majority of those might be an LA position and a clerk, 1 to 2 clerk positions at the time. It is a employees market when it comes to jobs. So we've had some people come and then go.
Thank you.
There is actually a memo, full memo describing that, and so that's available in the board portal. It's not in the packet, but that's something we could be adding
It's
to
in
the
the
packet,
portal,
because it already exists.
I'll look.
All right, P&G.
Okay, so we met on March 13th. We reviewed and updated the policy grid to be consistent with our review process. We looked at 2 policies that were carried over from the last P&G meeting. The first one we looked at was workplace violence, and we just had 2 small changes with that, as noted on the policy. In red,
Page 73.
73, just a small change at the bottom of that policy of who would be responsible in regards to notification, and we just added the employee's immediate supervisor. And we also updated the responsibilities of the Albany Public Library Human Resource and Finance Manager for this particular policy. The second policy we looked at extensively was the hazardous material policy, which we will bring back to our committee. We're gonna have our facilities manager look at some of the changes that we were thinking about, and also have Bob take a look to make sure that we're in compliance with everything that we should be. So that was our March 13th meeting. We met again on April 4th. And we reviewed our bylaws, and we will be presenting the bylaws in the May meeting and hopefully bring to a vote at the June meeting. That's all right.
Any questions? I have one. With the bylaws, when I have 2 thoughts on the bylaws. Do you want me to send those to you? Should I attend a meeting? How should I do that?
I think we present and do the discussion and the edits, right?
I'm sorry?
We present the bylaws and we do the discussion and the edits,
Yeah, I mean,
and then bring it to a vote in June as you mentioned the
Brenda
process, right?
really did we got through everything at the committee the other night.
Okay.
And we talked a little bit about, well, could we get these changes done in advance to present them at May for a vote? And we talked about the fact that it might be an easier process to present the changes that the committees come up with at May, discuss them, and then actually vote in June. So I think that would allow for additional
Changes
changes
Between
as part of the May meeting.
Okay.
All that said, there's really no reason that we couldn't, go over additional changes if you've got them, if you wanna shoot them along. It's just that, I think we were all surprised that we made it through the whole thing
Yeah.
in one meeting.
So you're around work? That's awesome.
But I think Brenda and Sarah made the wise choice to not, there's no rush on this. We can actually spend time at a meeting discussing the changes that they're proposing and any others anybody has, so that people don't feel like they have to vote the same night they're seeing them. Indeed, you couldn't. We have to give you at least 10 days notice according to the bylaws anyway, so.
Any other questions? nomination committee. So, there was an official meeting, so no minutes in your packet. We hosted a meeting at the Washington Ave branch, for prospective trustees, and we had 5 or 6 people come. Alyssa gave a terrific presentation about what it means to be a trustee and the process, the rules and the process, and we fielded lots of questions and thought it went very well. Jenna, Alyssa, do you want to add anything? Okay, well, that's it for nomination. Any other questions about committee reports? Okay, great. We are 10 minutes ahead of schedule so far. Go ahead.
In April, Arbor Hill West Hill has a 3-week nature-themed ceramics program to celebrate Earth Day. The program is currently fully booked with a waiting list. The Bach Branch's cookbook recipe swap theme for May is childhood favorites, so you can participate right outside. House staff are coordinating with the Schuyler Mansion staff to plan an event commemorating Pinkster, a historic celebration by slaves and free blacks with roots in the South End. And they are also discussing plans for an Earth Day event at Howe that will be in partnership with the Cornell Cooperative Extension and the Radix Ecological Sustainability Center. And if you need to know, my report's on page 63. In March, the library hosted pop-up libraries at Parkview and Livingston Senior Apartments. Staff also tabled at several Albany City School District events. The Washington Avenue Branch's Growing Readers program welcomed 38 new families and celebrated one family that completed their 1,000-book journey. And the Arbor Hill West Hill branch has begun a hip-hop class for teens. The Bach Branch's Let's Talk About It, Albany, discussed local highways that were designed and never built. And the Pine Hills branch hosted Leah Henneman, author of Farming While Black. That was a standing room only audience. The Delaware branch's beginner cross-stitch program celebrated Women's History Month with a feminist cross-stitch. And the Howe branch hosted an author-illustrator book signing and meet and greet organized in partnership with the Giffen Memorial Elementary School. We are close to completing renovations on the 3rd floor. And also, I'm sad to report there was a break-in at the Washington Avenue branch on Sunday, March 17th. The individual used a large rock to break a window by the rear staff entrance. Administration and facility staff are working with the Albany Police Department, and we are also reviewing our security protocols of this branch to prevent this from happening again. The window that was broken has been repaired and has become a half-glass window and half-brick wall. Arbor Hill West Hill has been experiencing several incidents of juvenile misbehavior after school. The administration and staff, again, are reaching out to neighborhood groups, the police, and local elected officials for assistance. This is, again, becoming a serious problem. The neighborhood youth are standard users of the library. On weekends and school vacations and pre-dismissal, the library is often calm, and as one staff described it this Saturday, library-like. After dismissal of the local middle school, things become very different. I am concerned for both patrons and staff. My schedule has allowed me to be there for most of this week, so that's where I came from after this meeting. Things were very, very calm. However, yesterday was very serious. I met with the deputy commissioner before school dismissal, and then we were lucky enough to pull the commissioner aside and have a conversation with him last night at one of the community meetings. My next step, they've brought their lieutenant in charge of their NEEU unit. We will be working with them to allow Officer Pierce to stay a little bit longer and have Officer Jones report directly instead of the South Street station. We will also be adding staff to that branch. We feel that's been helpful and made the staff feel a little more secure. Today, we had a lot of staff there. Yesterday, we had a lot of staff there. Our community support specialist has been there and been working not just with the public, but also with the staff. We're just gonna continue to have people there, monitor the situation, and reach out to every community group that we can for assistance with helping with behavior, both inside and outside of the building. As far as statistics go, it was a good month for everything but circulation, which we were hoping we would see some changes. Circulation is still positive for the year, but last month just was not as good as we had hoped. or we had seen trending. However, other things like program attendance was up by about 3% compared to this time last year. Door count was up 12% compared to the 3-year average. Room use was up 10% compared to the 3-year average. And computer use was up 6% compared to the 3-year average. We like to use the 3-year average because some months we have much better than others. We'll see trends, but sometimes we'll see fluctuations due to weather. So that 3-month average is helpful. And I also want to point out the sixth metric that we like to report is to give you an idea of what branches do the most amount of a share of a certain metric. It is without a doubt that our Washington Avenue branch is our computer branch. There's where we see a significant amount of traffic for people coming to use computers. It's been pointed out to me by staff that this is happening because you cannot do job applications on your cell phone. So people know they can come to the Washington Avenue branch because it has good hours and that they can do their work there. I wish there was a way we could see, and maybe there is, how much traffic we're getting to city civil service and job sites like that. It would be interesting to see how that comes out. But 36% of our computer usage, this is both Wi-Fi and desktop, 36% of that's at our Washington Avenue. So I will open up the floor to questions. Jenna?
Have you seen any change in circulation since the 5th grade?
So we saw a big boost in January and February. We saw a little bit of a drop last month. Where we're seeing the boost in circulation is books, and where we're seeing it mostly is in children's books. So our children's books are performing really, really well. Our books are performing well. Our e-books are performing really, really well.
Oh, really?
So those are all positives. Again, a lot of the drop in circulation is DVDs, and that volume's going down. But we've talked about it. One branch where we've seen a drop in circulation, which concerns us, is Pine Hills. That's our second highest circulator, and the staff there have some ideas and we're gonna build the collection there. We believe we need to make a better browsing collection there.
So, but children's books and ebooks both were not fined. Oh, well, I mean, if you
Unless you're a
come out of
parent
children's
coming
book,
in
yeah.
and taking out several books.
Yes.
So it's interesting to see. I'm curious to how next month is gonna look. However, I was at Arbor Hill today where a woman came to us, explained to us why there were so many fines on her card, started giving us the story, and John just said, "We can just waive your fines here right now." And she wanted to hug us. She realized it was inappropriate, so she did put her arms out. But again, we'll see. It's not a huge drop compared to this time last year, but there was a little bit of a percentage drop, which was disappointing.
Other questions, concerns?
I would ask for the board, if you have the ear of your current council members or any elected, to put it on their radar that we are having youth issues, not just at Arbor Hill, but we are having some issues at Howe as well. And what we're seeing is an increase in after-school misbehavior where we don't have solid NEU officers. And we've made it really clear to the chief last night, and the lieutenant in charge of NEU and the deputy chief, that those officers were the direct interaction with the library, and it was really positive. Those were the people we went to. Where there are still those officers, we have the ability to reach out, and we've had some success in the South End. Pierce is fantastic, and we would all like to 3D print him and put him, at every location. And so where we have solid officers that are there all the time, we see positive behavior after school. Where we do not have those officers, that's where we really struggle. And we want to fix the world's problems, and sometimes that's to our own detriment. However, I think the staff and the administration are recognizing that this may be bigger than the library. Sorry to leave it on a down note.
And Lane, you're looking pensive, are you getting ready to?
Well, no, I'm just thinking, I'm just curious as to, what the problem years, and I understand, I know Officer Pierce, and I also know Chris Jones. I love them both, they're good people, and they really do have good relations in the community. I'm concerned, though, that we find ourselves in a situation where we feel we have to have police presence in order to, have, constructive experience or positive experience in a library. And I guess I suppose I wonder more about that. What is going on? What is causing that? And if there is something else that can be done.
That was very much the discussion at the Sheridan Hollow meeting. I'm sure that'll be the discussion at the Arbor Hill West Hill or the Arbor Hill Neighborhood Association meeting. And we've banned kids, and it's, again, not our regular kids. We have kids who are regular library users that are coming in, using the library. What we're seeing are children that we're having, and young adults that we're having a hard time identifying, getting their names, knowing who they are. Not all of them are middle school students in Arbor Hill. The young man that we had to talk to the other day was from Myers. Some of them are from the high school. Some of them are from a Brooklyn, and some of them are completely off the grid in them. A lot of the issues is we can get it out of the building, however, it's on the sidewalk, and that's much harder to move, and that's a little more concerning. That's when we really involve the police. What we'd like to see is what we had at Delaware, which was the police presence was a positive one. We don't want the police coming in the door and saying, you gotta get out, and policing the library. What we'd like to see is what we had a few years ago, and what we see with Pierce during the day, and what we used to see with Ben out in the South End, where Ben would come in, have a conversation with kids, get to know their name. They would know that's a place where they could have a positive interaction with the kids, and that worked really, really well. We don't want to make a call to 911, have the car show up, have the car clear up the library, and then leave it. That's not the interactions. What we like to be is the bridge between the department and the kids that are in the neighborhood, and facilitate what we've seen in other places, which is a positive relationship. And that's not, that's where we're struggling, where we don't have these community engagement officers. It's cars, and you get the car and the car shows up, sometimes it's 45 minutes late, they don't ask for the kids' names, they just move them along, and then they get in the car and they go to the next call. And I think that's building not only a negative relationship for the police, but also it's viewing for some of the kids, oh, you're just gonna call the cops on us.
When I've lived in Arbor Hill, there were community engagement officers, are they not?
There's several positions that are unfilled.
Oh.
Are they not filled?
The South End is where we're seeing this issue.
Several vacant positions for a while now.
The chief has been very open that they are understaffed.
I don't wanna take up.
No, that's why we're here.
Doing okay on time, so I mean, cause what I think I heard you say, or what are the behaviors that you're seeing that you feel like you need to bring the police in? Because that is an extreme, that is a, ways are extreme, but that's, that's a big deal, and I think that you've indicated it's a big deal, you don't want it to be that way, but what's happening that you
We
really
have
need to call the
We have
police?
had a staff member struck. We have had kids just coming in and pulling books off the bookshelves and making a mess. We've had several incidents where fights either began and then we got them out the door and then they made it to the street, or they started to the street and then they made it into the library. Very serious issues that, our staff are trained how to engage and talk. I'll give my example Monday, a kid almost swung on me. And it's a young man who doesn't even live in the neighborhood. He heard me say to Ray, let's just call the police. And he walked in with a friend and he squared up on me and said, you know what I do to rats? And I said, no. And then he kind of looked at me and I looked at him, and I think for some reason he thought better and turned around and walked out.
How old was he?
I have been told he's 15 or 16, he's on the police radar. Pierce has spoken with his mother, staff has spoken with his mother. His mother has actually come in and spoken with the community support specialist and tried to come up with a plan. However, even engaging, even engaging the parents and having Annie is to come in and say, hey, we're here to help you, what resources can we provide? And she's met with her. And we still, the young man showed up again and was there. So, our staff is very hesitant to call the police. And again, we don't want to be the place that's known for calling the police, but a clerk was struck, items have been damaged. I was at Hal the other day for our board meeting, right before the board meeting happened, and we had a group of young people who came in and there were several books that were pulled off the shelf. We've had several incidents of fights there. We had a fight right outside the building that we had to call the police a few weeks ago.
I think, I do agree with what Arlene said as well, as far as the police presence and trying to see the root cause and trying to do other things, and not just it be the police. And I do also feel that, taking a closer look perhaps at some of these situations, because you and I had a conversation, I was asking you about banning, and you told me that, okay, well, these guys have already been banned. Well, let's look at some situations or some processes we can put in place where if these young people are banned, keep them, a way to keep them out of the libraries. If they're banned for a reason. So I think we can take a step back and look at some of the processes that we have and how we can handle some of these things. A lot of this stuff is happening with young people who have been banned. So how can we keep the banned people out? So if we can come together, probably look at some other processes or things that we can do to help make the situation better, because it's not just APD. We have to come up with some other things as well. And I'm all for calling the police if you're threatening me. Yes, I'm calling.
So what we've been doing that's effective at Arbor Hill is we've actually been stationing 2 people at the door. However, on Friday, 2 individuals who were banned literally physically pushed our staff out of the way as they were letting another patron in and just came into the building.
See, that's my concern about banned people, is that they do things outside. It makes it hard for everyone. So I'm just wondering about other groups that might be engaged, who are working with kids who or young people who have been in troubling situations, and may be a source of support and calming things.
One organization that's been extremely
Snug
supportive,
has been coming in.
is Snug, and they've been great. However, in the last week, they've been very busy in other parts of the city because of other things that are going on.
The Sky has been reaching out to a lot of people, so it's not just, we're just gonna say, oh, we're gonna involve the police and nothing, haven't been trying other things, because I know for a fact Scott has been reaching out to other folks, but the resources are very slim, so what do you do?
So I have reached out to Commissioner Jones to talk about the recreation center. I'll be reaching out to Trinity again to talk about their recreation center.
The school?
The school is on my radar. However, the school was very helpful a few years ago when we had issues at the Delaware branch. Very responsive. From what my staff have described, they have their hands full at the middle school. It makes it a little bit more difficult. It's also, there are some education laws that do get in the way of them identifying people for us. What we've learned is the minute we get their name, it kind of takes the anonymity, takes the power away. However, it's much harder to get names because the school is not as willing to provide that information. Annie has been trying very, very hard to work with the school social workers. We've seen it as maybe we create a line of communication that we provide a list of banned children and say, or banned youth, and just say, here's the kids who we have banned. Is there any help as social workers? Are they on your list? And this is, again, where it's worked with APD, with Officer Pierce in particular, being able to go, but as this one young man that, I had a conversation with Monday, his mom already knows, the police already know. He knows he's trespassing. He doesn't care. So
And unfortunately, with the juveniles, there's nothing they can do. Like with the adults, there's a arrest that can be done with a trespassing, but with juveniles, there's nothing. The police officers can't even arrest or charge of any sort.
Well, no, I understand. I'm just trying to look at, the range of options and partners that can be worked with. And so, I'm wondering if there needs to be a different construct in terms of how the school district is collaborating with the library.
So one thing that the board can be helpful with this is to talk to your other electeds on the school board to see if there's some support from that level.
Have there been conversation with the superintendent?
There has.
Yes.
So the last time this happened, we had a meeting with the school superintendent. I've been waiting to hear back from the mayor's office. I reached out to the mayor's office on Friday. I've yet to hear I heard we're gonna schedule you in. I've yet to get a meeting. I've actually been trying to physically be at the building there, just to help out. However, the school district is on my list of organizations which I will be contacting again to see if we can meet and we can talk. I really think Annie, as the community support specialist, this is where we've been talking about what is the construct that we can do here. How can we change it so there's not recidivism, so these kids aren't coming back and doing this after a few months. And I don't know if bannings and lengthy bannings work all that well with adults or kids. So we're trying to move away from that model, but understandably our staff are concerned because, they don't want some of these people in the building.
No, and I don't want stuff on the street either, so,
Exactly.
there's a problem here. I'm also wondering about the churches. The library is surrounded by some churches. And I'm wondering if a conversation with the pastors might also be able to
That's a
create
good
an
idea.
opportunity for some additional support.
I mean, could you do me a favor and just identify some churches in the community
Yes,
that
I
might
can
be,
do
that
that
might
for
be
both Arbor Hill and South.
South End? That would be huge. We reached out last year to actually do our community report to some of these groups. It was the response, we just weren't able to schedule. However, I think this might be a good way. And I can tell you that, the Common Council member, Love, has been very responsive on this as well. And I'm gonna reach out, we saw each other last night, and I'm gonna reach out to her. She's been busy, so I'm gonna reach out to her and have another meeting with her. She's actually come over and sat in the branch with us.
Okay.
So we have, and Common Councilman Robinson has been responsive. He's not been able to meet, but I think I'm gonna reach out to him again and ask for another meeting at the branch to try to get him at the branch. Just to kind of see, we're always nervous, we're gonna invite people into the branch and it's gonna be wonderful, like today was great, but Councilwoman Love was great because she just goes, this is the way it should be. And this is how I want it to be all the time. And she recognized, she saw little blips here and there and she goes, okay, I recognize where this can be an issue.
Okay, all right.
You said a couple of moments ago that if you're wanting to be in contact with your common council member, what's the message that we're trying to bring there? Do they need more?
I would just, what I think would be beneficial is just to talk about how the relationship with our community officers, how positive it was for the library. And that, again, we don't want to call the police, have a car show up. It's better when you have somebody like Will Pierce, who knows how the library works out of the library, really cares about the kids in the neighborhood, really wants the neighborhood to have a good experience. Ben was the same way down in the South End. And has a relationship with the families and sometimes can be the bridge. So we had an issue with a young man who was under the allowable age of the branch. It was communicated very differently to his family member. There were some issues between the staff and this parent. And Will was really great in getting them to sit down, getting them to the table so they could sit down with Annie and Alex and talk about some of the issues, and that's what we want to do. We'd much rather be able to just talk to the parents and have a substantive conversation. Many of them are responsive. It is much harder to do when we're doing it on our own, unless we start asking for library cards at the door. It is much smoother and much easier when we have these community engagement officers who are talking to our staff and helping us identify some of these youth who know that they're anonymous, so it's gonna be harder for us to get a hold of mom and dad to have a conversation about that.
So the message is that we want more and better community engagement.
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's important to realize, and I think it came out in the conversation, that these are community issues that are showing up in the library, or not library issues per se. And so they require a community solution and not just a library solution.
And as much as our staff would love to solve this, I think this is the one time where I have to say this is beyond our scope, because I'm worried about everybody. I'm worried about patrons.
Well, thank you for that. We're still on time. All right, so quickly, the board evaluation report is on page 72. Nothing major here, thank you all for completing that, that's really helpful for both Scott and I. And I noted several people were concerned about the length of the meeting, and for those who weren't here at the beginning, you will be disappointed again tonight. But I did put times in the agenda so that we can sort of know what to expect in terms of meeting length, and can help each other recognize how long we're taking, and if we're going over, we can make a group decision about where we are on the agenda. So, and whether we want to spend more time on that issue or not. Any other comments about that? Get a little time back. All right, thanks all. And now we're gonna move into talking about the board retreat and strategic plan discussion. So I wanna reintroduce Nancy and Diane, who are gonna be helping us with the retreat, and they're gonna work with us in just a moment. Before we do that, I just wanna talk a little bit about some of the conversations I've been having with them and with Scott, and we're gonna talk a little bit about training that we went to. So, one thing that I really want to do as president is help all of us create a sustainable model for the board, so that in the long term, we all have a better shared understanding of our roles, and that and the relationship with the staff, so that we can appropriately provide governance that we were elected to provide. And in the past, I think staff were doing a lot of the work, and we would obviously rely on the staff to do a lot of the work, and some of that governance was not was a little bit kind of shifted over to the staff side. So we've been doing a lot of things to bring that back a little bit, and I think that's important for the long-term health of the board. So that's kind of my big picture vision, that we'll talk a little bit about that at the retreat. And then related, last month Scott and I had the opportunity to go to the Upper Hudson Library System and take a training on library leadership, which was for executive directors and board presidents to go together. And so there were probably 10 different libraries there. It was well attended, it was a very good program, and it was given by Tim Burke and Mary Fellows of the system. And they emphasized that governance is not, it's confusing as far as what it is, and often happens in libraries. They show a picture of yin and yang, this is like library, and that the right balance is, there's these smooth lines and we know where the boundaries are, and then they often get blurred because of past practice or because of discomfort and newness or whatever, or habits. And it's up to all of us together to kind of figure out where those lines are supposed to be and shift them back into focus. So I learned a lot at this training, and I have a big long list of things that I want to talk to you all about things I want to change, but I recognize it will take time. I'm not going to go through that list at once at all. And so I wanted to give Scott an opportunity to talk about the training.
I just thought it was beneficial because I think it really clarified roles for myself and for Karen, and I think for the most part, this board is doing really, really well. However, it kind of made me feel a little more empowered about, okay, now I have a better understanding of, how this should work. And I think we're almost there. I think it's just strengthening some things and, being a little bit clearer with the process. I'd like to remind the board that I really think we're in an adolescent phase in terms of the organization. We did a lot of growth, and the administration before me had to put a lot of work into putting 7 buildings, putting 5 buildings out there. And in the last few years, I've gotten the fun job of kind of clearing up some processes and doing some things a little bit differently. And I felt like coming out of this, I felt much more secure about the decisions and the role that, how I can work with the board to make these things happen.
Alright. So, Nancy and Diane, take it away.
So, Diane and I, well, we're thrilled to be working with you, and we've done some training together, some presentations together, and you'll very quickly see that we have very different styles, and tonight will be very evident of that. But the first thing, we're not actually, well, okay, so the first thing that I want to do is applaud you for being willing to work with us. And Karen and Diane and I have spent some time together, thinking about this process and continuing to flesh out the details. And I know that one of your priorities as a group is to have fun. And in June, we will definitely have fun. But tonight, what I wanted to do was just share very quickly again what some of the process is going to be moving through the next couple of months. And then Diane's going to actually do some fun stuff with you tonight. So. I'm really appreciative of the fact that Karen and Scott were willing to share both just a little bit of background about the training that they went to, but also, I've challenged Karen over the past couple of months to really think about her vision as a leader, and also her vision for this library and for the Board of Trustees. The opportunity to create a replicable model and to focus on long-term sustainability is really an exciting one. I love the description that Scott just gave about being in adolescence, which really implies that this is an evolving leadership group, but also a group that is willing to evolve over the next several months, several years. So the combination of Karen's vision and goals and the training will provide the framework in part for the June retreat. I'll remind you all that the strategic plan goal that we're going to be working with reads that we intend, and this is the library, not Diane and I, we intend to develop and empower strong, capable, flexible, and vocal users, staff, volunteers, and board members who embody the values of the organization. That's the overarching goal that we're working with. And that'll kind of lead our discussion when we get together in June. Leading up to that, I alluded when I met with you, I think back in February, we're going to be doing a survey. And Karen, Diane and I talked last week about the opportunity to do 2 surveys actually. One for board leadership and one for staff. And so we're going to be meeting Karen's like, I need to talk to Scott about that. So that's a possibility. One we're going to discuss with you is the possibility to do a staff leadership survey as well as a board leadership survey. And so we're going to get together and figure out what those look like and pull those together and share them with you within the next several weeks, by early May. We're also going to do, and I'm not sharing any details with you, but we are going to get a little warm and fuzzy in June. We're going to do a leadership compass exercise, which focuses on styles. I'm sure a lot of you, if not all of you, are familiar with the Myers-Briggs type indicator. The leadership compass asks you to reflect on what your strengths and weaknesses are and how you work with other people of like profiles and then leverage each other's strengths and address each other's weaknesses. We will do some sort of modified SWOT analysis, really taking a look environmentally. So what are the strengths and weaknesses of this organization that you perceive, and how do we address it? And we're really just doing this all to collect information to be able to address it. And then we're going to also focus on creating, again, this aligns directly with the strategic plan, co-created definitions of what it means to be an engaged advocate, which is what you all are, as well as what it means to assess effectiveness, which is what your responsibility is. So those are the strategic plan objectives that the board has under the goal that I read, just a couple of minutes ago. So that really, I mean, that's a broad brush real description of the process between now and basically 2 months from now. What we're going to be doing, the survey, gathering information, pulling together what we hope is going to be a inspiring, fun, thought-provoking, and productive retreat in June. As I've been listening today, March and February, there is, and Karen alluded to this list of actions or actions that you want to focus on. We are not going to resolve problems or address specific actions in June, but what we are going to do is talk about how we develop processes to work on addressing these actions and problems to make you all as effective a leadership group as possible. And again, hearkening back to what Karen started out by saying, creating a sustainable model, because you all may choose, well, you have terms, but there will always be renewal in the leadership position here. And the opportunity you have is to put a model in place that ensures that you continue to be a high-functioning, sustainable leadership group. So that's what I wanted to do. Now what I wanted to do is turn it over to my dear friend, who I always describe as living in a world of unicorns and rainbows.
She does, she does.
Because she's the creative one.
Before you get started, I'm very excited about, is there any responses or actions to what Nancy presented?
So could you just articulate from your perspective the goal of our retreat?
Right, is to kind of, to what Nancy said, is to, when we think about that strategic objective, make sure that we have a group conversation about what it means to be engaged advocates and assess effectiveness, because we talked about, she said, much as my vision, and it's not, this isn't about me, right? This is about, these are things that I have in mind, but I want to have a group conversation about what these things mean for the whole board, and have a group kind of consensus about what this means and what the board is and how it functions. And then again, create some processes so that when issues come up in the future, as we orient people, that we kind of know we can all help reinforce the processes so that we know where that line is about roles and can help each other and the staff do our governance role.
So what in your mind is, for lack of a better word, the problems or issues that you feel like as a board we need to work on? Because I'm all for consistency. I'm not sure. Do we think there's a problem?
I think we been working really hard on more engagement. Since I've been president, we have had more discussion time. That you've noticed that something that changed when I came on. I want to see everyone's comfortable, have an opportunity to speak up. I don't know that we're quite there yet. And I want to make sure people get more comfortable with numbers and ask questions about numbers. That doesn't mean understanding the whole audit. I don't know if I'll ever get there. But that we're looking at the right level of the budget and feeling comfortable asking questions about that. Those are some of the things in my mind, and making sure that we have really healthy relationships, personal relationships together to help facilitate our work in our meetings, making those productive.
And I hope I didn't imply that there are problems. My objective when I work with leadership teams is to create as high a functioning leadership team as possible. So everything is an opportunity. It's not, there isn't necessarily a problem, it's just agreeing as a group that we can always elevate our expectations of ourselves and of one another and create really healthy interpersonal dynamics. And so it's really just, it's doing that kind of self-reflection about ourselves and about how we interact with each other and making sure that that is a consistent theme going forward.
Sounds okay. I'm gonna come over here so I have a corner of the table for my props. Oh. So that I can see all of you. So you're gonna notice that my language is very different than Nancy's. So let me start by saying that it has tickled me each time I have come that we are in a library. Because libraries are my spiritual and very psychic home. I grew up in the Carnegie Libraries in Pittsburgh. I was the kid who cut school and went to the library. One of the first things I understood is if you were quiet, obviously it's a different issue, if you were quiet, people let you be there. And that's where they kept the books. And today I'm a writer because that's where they kept the books. And I made that connection. And obviously I brought some books tonight, but I want to start with a story. And our story takes place in the summer in Washington, D.C. If you've been to Washington, D.C. or you've seen pictures of it, you know that summertime in Washington, D.C. is busy, right? Parents are taking their kids to the nation's capital, and school trips are coming, and of course, it is the destination for international visitors. The other thing that we know about Washington, D.C., and it's always when I talk about it, I start to talk faster and faster and faster, because Washington, D.C. is very fast. The average speech rate is fast, and people walk and talk all the time in Washington, D.C. If you have ever gone to call on a legislator or an advocate, the first time that I did that, I thought, I'm going to go to someone's office and sit down in front of this person across the desk and I'm going to display my presentation. Well, that never happens. The best you get when you call a legislator is walk with me. And they're going to say, I'm walking over to the Capitol, walk with me, I'm walking over to so-and-so's office building, and that's your interview time, that's your presentation time while you're walking. Because basically you've got 3 years in order to get anything done in Washington, D.C., and people are off to the next. So on this particular July day, 2 gentlemen are walking together at lunchtime, and they're walking on the mall, which is a quarter mile between the Capitol and the Washington Monument. And it's all grass, it's lawns broken by streets. And they're having their daily walk and talk with those scholars. Now, one of the things that happens on the mall in the summer is cacophonous. Tourists from all over the world are there trying to find museums, and they're lost. And there's a lot of languages. And where tourists come, vendors come. So we've got the food trucks lining up, and we've got the souvenir sales lining up, and everybody's calling out what they have. The mistake that tourists make is bringing their cars anywhere near the mall. They get lost, you can't park. They thought, it's a museum, I'll go park in front of the museum. Of course you can't do that. So then the local drivers are just leaning on their horns the whole time, like just screaming to get these tourist cars out of their way. There are 4 softball games at all times on the National Mall in the summertime. People who work there come and play in the game, and tourists are very welcome to jump in, and they're there until dusk. So it is a noisy, busy place. And the 2 gentlemen in this story are taking their walk, they're discussing things. One is a curator at the Museum of the American Indian, and he is Native American, and his longtime friend, who is a scholar in the Museum of American History. This is a true story in town. So they're walking and they're talking, and there's noise all around them, and they're engaged in their conversation. And all of a sudden, the man who is Native American, he stops and he says to his friend, a cricket. And his friend looks at him, and he says, yeah, a cricket. And he goes down to that little piece of grass that's between the street and the sidewalk, and he goes like this. And indeed, he finds a little tiny cricket in the grass, making a teeny tiny sound that crickets make. And his friend looks at him and says, how did you do that? And he says, that's what I was raised to listen for, the sounds of nature. And they were friends a long time, so his friend gives him a very skeptical, oh, you're doing your Indian thing look, right? And they laugh about that. And he says, wait, let me show you something. And he reaches into his pocket and he takes out a handful of coins, dimes, quarters, nickels, and he bends over to the concrete sidewalk and he pours out the coins. Everything around them stops. The hot dog guy, you dropped your money, a lady coming forward, she's running after his money. Here, you brought some money. Somebody in a car says, your quarter rolled over here, let me help you pick up Your money, do you see your money? Do you see some money over here? Your money, your money, your money, your money. And he says to his friend, that's what most of us were raised to listen for, right? Status differences, housing differences, income differences, occupation differences. Not that that's a bad thing, right? That's our culture. It is those are the measures that we carry inside of us. And they go on to talk about, out of this story, the things that we should be listening for, and that in fact we can train young people of all ages to listen for, which are hopes, aspirations, sadnesses, regrets, griefs, dreams, things that we want for other generations to have. And I think this is a fitting story for libraries because we know there is culture, right? That is the transmission of our culture. Last night on Twitter, I found this quote by Susan Orlean, who wrote the extraordinary book, the library book, and she said, libraries are about permanence, memory, and preserving the stories that make up a culture. So you have a very high charge, both as staff and as board members. You're preserving the culture through stories. And so in June, we're going to pick up this thread of stories, but I also wanted to share with you some examples. So I brought three. I went to my bookshelf at home and I brought three. The other thing that we know about stories is their narrative, right? We now know, even in the IT world, that the best carrier of data is a story. Stories will organize always better than any digital device. If you can tell somebody a story, they will remember those details rather than a fact or a chart or any other system of organization. So tonight I brought, as my example, 3 books, 3 different genres. 3, I think fair to say, of the greatest books that we now know about. First, we have fiction. We have Anna Karenina, which is one of the great books of art and literature. Stories about stories within here. We have each individual story, and we have all of those values that I just mentioned, right? We have aspiration, we have grief, we have struggle, we have family loyalty, and one of, I always say to people in the business world, the best book about work, how Laban teaches his family the value of work and doing a good day's work, is right here. I'd love to put all those chapters into the Harvard Business School. Nonfiction, we have a very recent book, but we can say it is now one of the greatest books. It won the Pulitzer Prize last year, Evicted by Matthew Desmond. He's an economist and a sociologist at Dartmouth. He wanted to write a book about, get this, poverty and affordable housing. Well, that doesn't put you to sleep, right? So how could he help us understand what the national issues are around poverty and affordable housing, Jan? He wrote this extraordinary book with 12 personal stories that people say they can't put down. That book groups are passing on and passing on and passing on. It won the Pulitzer Prize. Every review has led people to press this into their family members' hands. It's used in colleges and universities. I'm also happy to say he's coming to Albany next year. That we're bringing him in to have a community forum to talk to legislators, and we're going to be looking for a community read, so I'll be back to talk to you about the community read. Stories, how else can we help somebody understand possibly a dry and disinterested topic like affordable housing by hearing compelling stories? Self-help and self-improvement. This book's title is Alcoholics Anonymous. It's known as the Big Book. Today in the world, there are 30 million people recovering from addiction. AA was started in 1937. You can do that math and see how powerful this movement has been. This is they say, the Bible. There's about 20 pages of sort of instructions or history of how this came about, and the rest of this book is personal stories. And it is through the power of personal stories that people are led to recover and to change their lives. So here it is. Here's what happens. And behind me and behind all of you are all of these rooms full of books that is still extraordinary that we let people take home. You trust me. You let me take books home and I bring them back. Right? It's an extraordinary thing that you are a part of. So some things I want to give you, sir, some soft homework. One of them is to pay attention to how many times you use to tell a story in the next week. How many times people tell stories to you? How many times will you tonight or tomorrow morning say to somebody, hey, did I tell you about, I just remembered the time. That TV show reminded me of the time when we were young and we went on this trip and we this thing. You are telling stories all the time, and people are telling you stories all of the time. The other thing that I invite you to think about is they say that there are only 2 stories in all of the universe. A person goes on a journey and a stranger comes to town. So I offer those to you when you're watching television, you're going to the movies, whatever fun movie that you are doing. Hold them up against that frame. A stranger came to town and a person went on a journey. Alzheimer's disease, a stranger comes to town and someone goes on a journey. Cancer, a stranger comes to town and lots of people go on journeys. Gone with the Wind, we can spend a half an hour figuring out, counting all the people who went on journeys and a couple of strangers who came to town, including the North, right? So explore that theme, because we will bring that back to you as individuals. I hope that in June, I'll tell you a few more stories, and I hope that maybe you'll tell some stories too, and I guarantee you we will have a very happy ending in June. Thanks.
Just a reminder, we chose the date of June 1st. We're still working on the venue and food and that kind of thing. Thank you for replying to the doodle poll to get that scheduled. And just to reflect on what I said earlier, I think there's also this shift, like I mentioned it earlier in the meeting, of where the roles are. And that those have been shifting a little bit over the past year or two. And I think one of my bigger goals is to help us understand where those roles are and have a shared understanding of those so that we can work more effectively together. And again, not because we're not working effectively together, as Scott said, but so we can work even more effectively and now in the long term. So thanks for your patience. All right, next up is the workplace violence prevention and incident reporting policy.
It's on page 73.
Yes, thank you, Nancy and Diane.
Thank you, great to see
Thank you,
everybody.
ladies.
Can I make a second motion to accept the policy?
Yes. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Okay, great. Okay, now we've got a long series of agreements that were shared over the past week. Scott has added some helpful memos, and so hopefully you've had a chance to read those and have thought of questions in advance. First up is the North Albany MOU, and I think we're gonna have explain that one. We talked about this at our last meeting, executive session, and now this is with the Albany City School District, and so that has now been passed by their board. And then now it's our turn to pass it, so can you just give a little more?
We've heard about this before. We talked about the fact that we would basically be entering into an agreement to agree if the vote passes and the purchase goes forward. This is that document. It's written in very plain English just to talk about the things that we know we need to talk about and deal with in a lease when we get to the point of having a lease. The red lines are changes that I had suggested to the school district before they approved it. For the most part, all of those changes got accepted. The blue language on the bottom of page 3 actually got moved to a slightly different location and adjusted slightly by their council, but not in a way that is of concern. So if we're comfortable and pass this, then this will form the framework of what we do as that project moves forward. And obviously, if it doesn't move forward for some reason, then this really doesn't speak to that circumstance.
So let's get motions and then we can have discussion.
I'll make a motion, move it.
Thanks, Brenda. All right, discussion. So, questions, comments? Yes,
Why a 5-year term?
I think the thought process, are you talking about for the lease or are you talking about for the MOU? Yeah, I think that the thought process is just in case we don't get a lease, we at least have some agreement in place. But there really isn't a need for a term for the document at all, really. I mean, it's really basically an agreement to agree.
I just have some questions about, I know on page 78 in the building areas and services, it talks about that the school district is going to be in charge of some services between the hours of 9 and 5, Monday through Friday. How does that affect us? Will we have like a separate bill for the hours that we are open? Like how, because we would need heating and
It's the non-utility services that you're referring to from 9 to 5. So janitorial,
okay,
custodial, things like that.
okay,
They're just saying that that's when they're gonna schedule their people.
gotcha. So we would just schedule our own.
And by the way, I don't think that's actually gonna be true. I think when it's all said and done, they'll probably schedule much like they do other schools, that there's staff, not around the clock, but, you know. Most of the city schools at this point have somebody from opening in the morning until quite late at night, because there's a lot of community use. I don't know why they specified 9 to 5, but I think it's just to limit that that's what they're gonna base things on.
Do we have any concerns over the fact that a lot of schools do set like heating and stuff for certain hours and will shut off a certain time? And if we have like weekend hours or anything like that, do we need to?
You know, because I think they're gonna be willing to work with us to make sure that when the project's done, maybe it's a zone heat, we can bring that up
Okay.
so that certain areas are on. It's definitely a concern. It's definitely something we will bring to the table and just say, hey, please don't shut the heat off. But that's really more of a, we just need to make sure we have clear communication with you as the landlord.
I mean, are there any climate control issues in that space now?
No, but we're only open when the YMCA is open.
They're open more often than we are.
Yes.
Yes.
But the school wouldn't be open on the weekends more likely, or
No,
at night.
it's, I understood, I mean, there's a specific detail that needs to be worked through there, but it's not, this is non-utility.
No, it's fine.
So it's not what they're getting at.
Okay.
Any other questions or anything? Okay. Then I'll call for a vote. All in favor? Aye. Great. Thank you very much. Next up is the CDTA Navigator Sales Agreement. And this, I think, went to, with the memo went out to trustees on Tuesday of last week. It was also in the draft and final packets. And so Scott, do you wanna give a quick overview of that?
Well, legal still needs to look over the review. There are some changes that we've identified that need to be changed, that need to be made. But the memo clearly outlines kind of the, how would you phrase it?
So I would say the board should focus on the deal terms in the memo tonight. The agreement is not at all what you'll ultimately be signing, because it was based on an iteration of a contract that you never signed. So for whatever reason, when CDTA put the changes in, we think they put them in on the wrong version.
Okay.
So the agreement isn't right, but the deal terms are what's changing. So what I would suggest, and this is up to the board, but if you're comfortable, approve the deal terms with a contract that is consistent with those deal terms being vetted by the director and council, and then we'll get the document done correctly.
Okay, so let's talk about the terms and how they've changed from the prior.
So the deal terms are, the commission has now been moved up to 4.5%.
From what?
From, I think it's 2.2%.
2%.
That puts us a little bit under the the largest organization that sells passes. I think we're about 0.5% under, Market 32 / Price Chopper. I think their deal agreement is either 5 or 5.5%. The length of the agreement does go to 3 years. North Albany is included as a location now, so they're gonna get us a terminal from North Albany. I think we may have to have a continued conversation until it finally comes, but it's at least in the paperwork that it's coming. It's been asked for several times by both staff and the public. And then we've taken out the fact that it is a pilot program and that it is an actual full program.
Alright, so that's 2 motions and then discussion again. So I'm gonna suggest we take our council's advice and approve the terms of the agreement. What would you call them?
Field
The
terms.
terms of the agreement, and that the contract is consistent with the previous contract that we worked out by the director and council. So that's the motion. Can someone make that motion?
I'll make that one.
Thanks, Amy. Second. Matthew, thank you. All right, now discuss.
So do we have that financial breakdown of staff time and costs from our end?
So we didn't really have a cost breakdown. What we did was a time breakdown, which was a sample of 2 weeks. On average, over that 2-week period, what we saw was probably about average time per transaction, compared to hours open, we're looking at about 8.32%. Is about how much time of open time that is taken up as staff time. At some of our branches, it's below below 1%. Where it affects us the most is Washington Avenue, which is about 23 to 25%. We have worked really closely with the senior clerks to mitigate some of the work that they were doing in the past. So remember that they're no longer collecting library fines. So that's some time that's not being taken, and also we're moving to a self-hold pickup model, which will take some kind of, it's a model that libraries have been following and that we've wanted to do, we've been talking to do for a few years now. So we're seeing some movement off of some desk work, and this is some new and additional work.
So the average is 8.32%, some as high as 25%
Some as high as
of all staff time on the desk?
Of staff time of hours where that service location is open. So in other words, hours, we take hours at the circulation desk and how much of their time is taken up with.
So at Washington Avenue, 25% of
Our open hours,
wait a minute, let me finish what I'm asking. 25% of the circulation desk staff, not overall library staff.
Not overall.
But that particular function, okay.
Yes.
And so so at 2%, remind me what we made in this pilot project, and what would 4.5% look like at the rate that we've been participating?
The 2% commission gives us about total for all the branches, maybe 700 to 900 a month.
Of all branches?
Yeah.
Okay, so, and then 4.5% at the estimated rate per year for the next 3 years? Is that, so that would be double that and a little bit more, so what's that?
Maybe 2,000.
Air math?
2,000 a month.
2,000 a month for all branches?
Yes.
But at Washington Avenue, 25% of staff time, so what is 25% of staff time at that function per month?
So you're
Probably
saying
more than
the
2,000
cost?
dollars, right? That's staff
Well,
time cost.
I guess we talked about this at last month's board meeting, that in order, let me just say, I'm completely delighted that we're partnering with this partner. But in order to evaluate, you better believe CDTA has gotten all of those numbers and figured out how cost effective it is for our staff to sell their bus tickets. I want us to do exactly the same as equal partners in a partnership. We're not doing any, this is an earned income situation and potentially could grow into other things, which I'd be delighted to consider. But we have to be as fiscally smart about this decision as CDTA is in noticing that we are so good at this, that it's worth their time. So I don't feel, I'm delighted to know we make $2,000 a month, but frankly, if one site is 25% of desk time, that's 25% that's not going to direct programmatic initiatives of the library. That's going to somebody else's effort.
Thank you, Alyssa, for raising that. And so I do want to hear from other trustees about that issue as well.
So, it only being their second year, I would assume that time would get lower as our clerks get better at providing the service, right? If it's, and the 25% is only at Washington, right?
Every other, second highest is Howe, which is at 10%, and then third highest is Harbor Hill, which is 4.3, and the other branches are around below 2%.
And I think you make a wonderful point, and I'm not diminishing it, but I think, I just remember that our last meeting, somebody came in and said, oh, I was coming in because I buy my bus passes, and I think about that in terms of getting people in the door who might not otherwise be library users. And then, oh, but I can take a book, oh, but I can, oh, there's this program going on, and it syncs with our mission.
Well, let's be wonderful advocates with all of those anecdotes when we have the numbers in front of us and we can make a sound financial decision whether we're going to take staff time off of library programmatic initiatives and spend it on some other organization's business of selling bus tickets.
Thank you, Alyssa. Again, other thoughts on this?
What is staff's actual feedback? Not the time, their feedback about doing it.
So I met with all the senior clerks about this, and they are relatively positive about this. While some recognize that it does create some additional work, it also does bring people in the door. We can do a full analysis of this if the board wants us to do a full analysis of this. But I really think this is a service that we're providing to the community. CDTA is not a for-profit organization. They're a nonprofit organization that gets federal funding and that works at a deficit. So I completely agree with Alyssa if this was, a for-profit organization, but it's not. But we can come back to the board and give a full, if the board chooses for us to do that.
And what has the the patrons feeling is, have you gotten any positive, negative?
Extremely positive feedback. The only time we get negative feedback is when our machines are down, our machines aren't working. We've had staff who were really frustrated when the machines weren't working. That happened at Arbor Hill. The cell coverage was so poor, but then we put them on our network. Really, the significant amount of feedback that I heard when we first launched was the request for a second machine at Washington Avenue, because we were getting so many people in the door. And then the majority of the negative feedback I received had more to do with the accounting side of things than it did with the clerical and frontline staff. Not to say that all staff were happy with this program, and it does get a little stressful when the lines get long for them to do. Yes, Brian.
I think it does make sense to see what this actual program costs the library. I don't think that's what we could ask. I don't.
Other feedback, Sarah,
Alyssa, ask my questions.
Well, I, as an intentionally carless person, really appreciate being able to charge my card in the library and not have to schlep to the Price Chopper. It just feels icky. I'd rather be here. I just did it before the meeting.
I like the idea that we're providing this opportunity in the community. I understand, this is, concerns, so we always have to have some balance here, but I really like the idea that we're doing this. And that you can make it work, I think it's a good thing.
I feel like we're filling a need in the community. It's very accessible. I think getting to Price Chopper might not always be accessible for people, but there's libraries in all of our communities, so I'm in favor of the program.
I'm in favor of the program.
Although, you know, with what I did say, if I can add in, it would be interesting to see that cost comparison.
Sure.
Yeah, asking to know what the cost is does not mean you're not in favor, because I'm certainly in favor. I know a lot of people use it. I'm in favor of a lot of things that I purchase, but I need to know the price.
We can definitely do that analysis.
So, do you want to vote on it? There's a motion on the table, so do you want to vote on it now? Is there a time crunch?
I mean, they're not gonna give you the 4.5% higher commission until you approve it. So it's, you know, if your choice is, we're gonna do it, 2 or 4.5,
That's what we
you're
get by
defeating
voting.
yourself by not approving it. If your goal is, we may not do it at all, then there would be a reason to wait. Because you're binding yourself to some additional period of time.
So those are the choices in front of us. We vote for it and get more commission now, or we wait and see if this is something you wanna.
We're not in a we're not able to negotiate. We can, they're negotiating based on their financial figuring. We're negotiating on it because it feels good.
Explain that, what do you mean, does it feel?
Well, we love this idea. I love this idea. I sound like a, cranky person, and I'm not. But I asked at the last board meeting that we have an accounting of how this shores up. And frankly, didn't even try. So I'm concerned that, I know how to fudge things too. So, you could have fudged it. I don't see that. So, and I don't see in the minutes where that was recorded. But I do distinctly remember at the last board meeting, I said, and others seem to agree, that I wanted to see something that accounted for what our financial, what are we in this for? What resources are being used? And, $2,000 a month and, maybe 25% on the Washington Avenue door is not quite enough for me to say this is, because if you just told me that Price Chopper gets 5.5%, perhaps we can negotiate for 5.5% because in fact, our staff is doing more. As Price Chopper has just negotiated that their staff is doing 25% on their desks. We're negotiating apples and oranges, we're not negotiating apples.
It wasn't in the minutes last time because it was 2 meetings ago that you raised that.
Okay.
So I think I'm gonna call for a vote for this, and if you're not comfortable with it, then feel free to vote no.
Are we locked into a time frame about when we have to decide? Do we have to decide tonight? Can we not take a moment and see if we can get the extra money?
That is an option that we can table this. Well, so Scott did negotiate
How does this
a
work?
doubling of our commission. And Price Chopper has more than doubling, right? And Price Chopper has, my understanding is there's significantly more sales. So they were in a better position because of the number of sales that they have to negotiate a higher rate. But we did double our rate. And I think that the analysis presented by the staff without actual dollar figures, clearly 25% of the circulation desk time at Washington Avenue is more than $2,000, let alone the rest of it. That's clearly, no, we're not making our money back. And so we have to decide, even if we got 5.5%, if we could potentially negotiate that, we're still not gonna get our money back on that. So the decision we need to make is whether this service is worth it to the community.
Yeah, so
for the cost.
I just have a question. What is the problem waiting or tabling this till we get the information? I guess I'm missing that.
We could do that.
We all like this program. I was just wondering,
What
would that be a big hindrance?
Bob just suggested is that we just wait, if we do decide to do it, we're not getting them more money.
Well, and then we're locked in for a 3-year period, so an option would be to say, okay, we'll take this for a year and we're renegotiating in a year, and in a year you do the analysis and start now documenting. We're not negotiating on equal terms, we're negotiating on feel good, and we're negotiating on, they know what their numbers are, we should know what our numbers are. That's a partnership, that's a worthwhile partnership.
So, we have two options, we can vote on this now and say yes, and if you think we should wait, we can vote no and then wait. Or, I wanna hear from around the table, let's just do a show of hands. Who would prefer to wait a month to do an analysis to figure out sort of it? Okay, so 4. Okay, and so who would prefer to just vote no?
I have a question though.
Go ahead.
My question is, how long would it take to renegotiate? Say we don't want a 3-year and we only want it for a year. How long would that take to renegotiate?
I don't think that would take long to renegotiate. You could definitely do a year, or we can try for a year. I think last time I negotiated with them, it was about a 2-hour meeting. So we can go back and renegotiate and negotiate, and I could say, can we do it a 1-year deal?
Why can't we ask for the same as what Price Chopper?
I did, I asked for more.
And what happened?
That was the number that they stayed at. I asked for 6 and we went down to 5.5.
So listen, I am not at this point advocating for renegotiation. I am saying that I wanna see the proposal from staff that says the pilot went great, these are the things that went well, this is what time we spent at it, this is basically how much money it costs us. We're reaching these 5 goals with it, as you board identified as strategies. And here's our proposal going forward, and we think that 4.5% is a good deal for 3 years. I don't see a recommendation, I see a contract, and I don't see how you've reflected it in our accounting. And that's what I'm asking for. And if you bring that next month, then maybe you get a 3-year contract at exactly that amount. It's not a negotiation. It's what, so then it's us deciding whether this is worth it or not, and so you want this information to help us. It's apples and oranges. I want it to be apples and apples.
I'm not following. out of the apples and oranges, what, or is it because you're saying
I
that-
want to know how this partnership benefits our organization. I wanna know how much it costs us in time. 25% on the circulation desk is of concern to me. If you said to me, we wanna spend 25% of circulation staff on a new initiative to do personal outreach, or I don't know, whatever, that's a change. And 25% is a lot of time for staff on something that's not it's not our programmatic initiative, unless you prove to me that in fact 25% of circulation staff to sell bus tickets relates to something that we are absolutely working on, and it's our initiative.
So now that we know the parameters, we can do a much deeper dive into this.
I don't want you to spend a huge amount of time,
No,
I want you
no.
to justify it.
So, but that may take more time than the document we prepared, or that was prepared for May. We don't have an issue with doing that at all. I need to know the parameters and what the board's looking for. So we want a cost analysis based on hours of process and how much we're paying people.
Cost analysis, you come up with what it costs for us to partner with them.
Okay.
They know what it costs to partner with us.
Does anybody else want to make an argument for vote tonight on this?
I'd like to make a short argument, but I'd also, I hear exactly what the trustee is saying, and she makes an excellent point, but I also think that this is never a program where we are going to make money. We are subsidizing, helping them sell bus cards, and I think that's a wonderful thing, and it's just a matter of how much are we going to subsidize them. And I think she raises an excellent point. It was a pilot program, so let's get as much information we can about the pilot so we know going forward, how much it's costing us to help subsidize their program, which is a very worthy program. And I think the trustees also need to understand the parameters of our relationship with CDTA. It's bigger than just this program. They are a tenant of ours, or they're in agreement with us to be able to do their bike program. We partnered with them to move the bus station from the Washington Avenue branch. They are a nonprofit organization. They're a complex organization that's it's trying to do very many difficult things. They're doing many of them well, and we're lucky to have an organization like this in the region to help people, the carless, or the people who want to move away from cars. It's all excellent points. So I think we want to subsidize them, and we want to help them, and I think Scott's done a nice job of negotiating this. But for the lack of a strong set of parameters, you probably did the absolute best that you could. So I would advocate that I wouldn't say that I'm going to advocate that we vote tonight, because in respect to the trustee's point, that we want to know exactly how much we're going to be subsidizing, and that's a very fair point. I also hear Bob's point that if we could get more money now, that'd be great. But if we're going to be, if your advice is we're going to be locked into a 3-year agreement, perhaps it is better to wait 1 month to give Scott some clearer instruction, or make it shorter. Whatever you think. I mean, you're the people who spent 2 hours speaking with them, Scott. So maybe you could, give us a little bit of insight about whether any of this is possible.
Can I just
Sure,
speak up, because I
absolutely,
think
of course.
something's getting lost in translation here. When we did this, we figured out how many transactions we were doing, the average time per transaction, so what that equates to in staff time wise, and we're saying 25% of our open hours. That's not for each individual staff member, that's total. So it essentially would be 1/4 of one staff member's time, because we only have the one unit at each location. And so that's where it's coming in. It's 14 hours a week, essentially, is what it, and we're open 59 hours a week.
Yeah, I don't wanna have to do air math
So,
right now.
but what I'm saying, I
I'd
think
like to
you're
see the
saying,
proposal.
you were, the way you were proposing, or you were stating it to the group, was 25% of circulations overall.
Total time.
Total time, and it's not all of circulation, it's
Oh.
literally 25% of one
That's a
person.
good point.
So-
Okay.
Jenna and then.
Yeah. So the other thing is that if you think about what the staff in the library is doing, they're answering questions, and they're answering questions about this, it's not necessarily outside their scope to be helping people get bus passes. It's not outside their scope to be helping when there's a problem with the computer. It's not outside their scope to be helping when they're having a problem with a job application. So I don't feel like this is lost time from our duties. And yeah, I also feel like our relationship with CDTA has been growing, and the new bus station at Washington Ave might be one of the reasons why we're seeing this increased door count. And we need to consider that. Like we're committing to helping these people who are at this major bus stop now. I don't.
So just to speak to Alyssa's concerns, I
Yeah.
think they're real.
Yeah.
Now that we know the parameters, we don't have a problem, it's not gonna take a considerable amount of time. This is something we enjoy doing, so it's not like that's gonna be hard for us. CDTA is not gonna pull out of the program because we won't assign this agreement right away. I can definitely go back with them and say, let's do a year instead of 3 years, I don't have an issue with that, I don't have an issue with having that discussion at all, and negotiating there. I think this can wait for another month and for us to do a deeper dive, and now that we know the parameters, we can provide that deeper dive and probably a little bit before the board packet, so you can all look at it and formulate questions. I can say, and it's the reason why we got the double, and I shouldn't say this on camera, but the reason why we got the double was having board pushback actually gives me a little bit more ability to negotiate. So, I don't think we don't have to vote on it tonight. We can wait till next month, and then we can go from there.
So I have this thing, and it's like taking a big picture view. I believe that not everything you do is gonna make money, but you do for service, right? But I think that there are other things that we do where we do make money. And that could subsidize the areas where we're not making as much. So the thing would be, for me, would be helpful, and not now, and I'm not sure when, maybe this could be a conversation at the retreat, is when we take the big picture and we look at where the money, where the revenue is coming in, and look at where we might be able to afford some charity. That's all, I guess that's how I take a look at it, because I know that there's some things that you're doing that's generating income, right? And so, could there be opportunities where you give some give back? And we do have to pay attention to monies. That's an area where not-for-profits get into a lot of trouble, because we're not looking at the bottom line, or looking at things in the way that, the trustee is suggesting that we do. But I just like to take the big picture view of everything that we're doing and see where we may have opportunities for giving, because we are generating in other areas.
There's never anything wrong with looking at return on investment.
It is something in the strategic plan, I believe, that we want to make sure that our partnerships have return on investment. And I think that, Andy made a good point about looking at, Melissa made a good point about thinking how we're subsidizing this part, but Andy made a good point about how that the whole CT relationship benefits, and this is part of a whole relationship, including the bus passes for employees and things like that. So, if you're comfortable feeling like you know what you need to do next.
Yeah.
Okay. When we table things, you can say
I'll
them.
table the motion or make a motion.
Somebody's gotta make a motion to table it,
I'll
or
make a motion to
we
table
could
it.
back off and just
Or I'll back off.
withdraw the motion, I mean, but that's what really needs to happen, is somebody's either needs to move to postpone it, or could just be withdrawn entirely.
I'll withdraw if Matthew will. Yes.
So there's no motion on the table.
Okay.
It's been
What motion?
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so next up is the curatorial memo and agreement. Are we going to talk about that at all, or are we gonna wait to executive?
We need to have a quick executive session conversation about it, so, I mean, it doesn't matter whether you do it now or not, but I would just assume you go on to the next item and then you can come back to this.
Let's do that then. Next, the annual report, and so page,
Starts on page 101.
101, and then 100 has a memo summarizing the document. And so this is a report that's due every year to New York State through the Upper Library System.
Yes.
And then you can just explain.
So every year we do this report, it goes into the state. So some highlights that I want to point out to the board, which is our print collection grew, which I know is sometimes a narrative that we hear that we're getting rid of it. We're not, it grew by 1%. And overall collection increased by 5%. 20% of that, there was a 20% growth in e-material. Collection, circulation, we saw a 6% decrease in circulation. However, circulation for e-material was up 15%. And overall material, so we don't, in those numbers that we give you, we don't count database usage. In the state report, database usage is counted, so that's about a 5% reduction in overall circulation. The district saw a 3% increase in the amount of material loaned out to other libraries. Program attendance, we grew by 19%, our programming grew by 19%, and our attendance actually increased by 3%, and we've changed that in the community report. Technology use was up, public internet terminal sessions were up 8%. You will see a report of Wi-Fi sessions down 37%, but we've shared with the board in the past that we actually weight our Wi-Fi numbers because we know our former system was over-reporting numbers. However, because those numbers were over-reported for so long, the state still makes a comparison. Our library visits were up by 6%, our registered borrowers increased by 7%, and our website visits went up by 9%. We also grew our staff last year by 5%, and we grew our operational numbers by 1%. And we meet all the state minimum standards for public libraries.
And I do want to mention with the Wi-Fi use, this should be the last year
where
the Wi-Fi use will be wonky, because we had 2018 was our first full year of the corrected numbers.
We over-reported in the past because we were not requiring people to click on the use agreement. And what that does is actually make someone active in saying they want to be on our Wi-Fi and not just have things collected. Or IPs collected.
Alright, so we'll do the same thing as before and do motions first and then discussion if necessary. So you want to move to accept that, that's the, what do you call this, the annual report, Public and Association Libraries. Thank you, Randy. Matthew seconds, thank you.
I'll second.
Any discussion, questions? Yes, Sarah.
On page 106 of the packet, under accessibility, I noticed that we don't have any assistive devices for persons who are deaf and hearing impaired, and also we don't have screen readers or refreshable braille keyboards and magnification software. I was just wondering if that's something we've ever looked into before?
So we've had it was about 15 years ago, we provided readers by the Association of the Blind. They were never used, so we decided to make room and pull them out of the branches. Keyboards we can definitely, braille keyboards we can definitely look into. Things for hearing impaired, we do provide headphones on our computers, that's typically where they're asked for. So I think this is where this report is a little bit lagging, because I don't think it catches up with the technology. So on all computers, on all browsers, you can select to make them larger on the browser. And we do actually provide small magnifying glasses that can be requested for people who need them to read the paper or physical items. So we could answer maybe this question, yes. I think it's more we're taking it as overall assisted devices. Like there were large boxes that you would bring your papers up to.
They actually, it's a weird, the way it prints out is very odd, but they actually ask on the report, do you have this software, do you have this product? And we don't have those specific products, but we do, like Scott said, the technology has improved since that question has been asked, and so on all of our computers, you can change the font size and increase that where it used to have to be a program. That's just available as part of the browser, and even Microsoft Word has that available right now.
But we can reach out to DLD and see what some of their requirements are and see if we can change that by some of the things we already do or making some improvements.
Yeah, I was more than anything surprised. I thought we offered some things, so I just wanted to clarify that.
And I think we're so close, because usually stuff like that is offered at the central, what would have been considered the central branch, and we're 2 blocks away from the state library that has the New York the state braille collection, so generally they have more resources available, so we would just send, since it's only 2 blocks away, we send people there.
That makes sense.
Any other questions? All right, all in favor? Okay, great. And then I think the public has left. So we can, we need a motion to go into executive session.